Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about politics and about the political system, and specifically about our democratic process. So, a book I'm working on now. In terms of democracy, you can think of democracy or government in general as solving two basic problems, at least. One is the problem of succession, and the other is the problem of management. The problem of succession being the fact that we want our political entities to continue, and human beings are mortal, and therefore that problem needs to be solved. The problem of management, which is a separate problem, is how we deal with problems as they arise in our political system or in our society. Those are two separate problems we clearly not only use, but have had great success with democracy in solving the problem of succession. The question is, have we had equal success with the problem of management, and are the problems with management going to undermine our success with the problems of succession? So if you were to go to an expert, let's say a physician, because you had a problem, and he would say to you, yes, this is a good time to treat you, but we have to be careful because the black helicopters are coming soon. Or this is a good time to treat you. Last month I was abducted by aliens, but now I can deal with you. How much confidence would you have in that doctor? So this is the situation we have in the United States, where surveys constantly tell us how much irrationality there is in the electorate. And one of the prime examples of that is the public response to this question of climate change, which a number of people have spoken about so far. This is a chart that was published in Forbes magazine, and it was used by Senator Ted Cruz to cross-examine someone who was testifying in a Senate hearing about the situation of climate change. And as Senator Cruz pointed out in the hearings, this is based on data by a very reputable company, Remote System Sensing, that takes data from satellites orbiting the Earth. This is the actual data from RSS. As you can see, what they showed is that the average temperature is steadily increasing. What the Forbes article did, and what Senator Cruz did, is simply cut off the last 17 years and then rotate the average temperature line. So instead of being headed upwards, it was on the level. And this is the quality of decision making that is now prevalent in the United States Senate, because Senator Cruz's party is in control of the Senate, and we have a climate change denier as the head of the Senate Environmental Committee. And so the question is, can we, as a matter of management, make decisions in a democratic system such that we're going to be able to deal with problems as they arose? As Eric mentioned, in some sense of despair, I wrote a science fiction novel rather than an academic work, thinking to communicate this way. I took a sardonic pleasure in the heat stroke line is basically the Mason-Dixon line, below which life has become impossible, except in very small clusters in the United States, and as Eric mentioned, afflicted by 2-inch-long flesh-eating insects. But the underlying premise, the backstory, was that the United States had broken up into smaller principalities. The coastal cities had been subject to such repeated storm surges that people had to abandon those cities and move inland. In one of the successor states, Mountain America, which was the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain states, there was sufficiently low population so that they were willing to accept refugees from the coastal cities, and indeed they had advantages because they could use them on the coffee plantations and the mango plantations and other things that were now prevalent in Montana and Wyoming. But in the Midwest, where they felt that they were crowded, what they did as people moved from the coast inland is shoot them. And that principality ceased to be a democracy and had to become a dictatorship. And so that's the challenge that I was dealing with. There are 5 million, roughly, Syrian refugees. About 1 million of them have reached the Western world. There are different ways of counting them, but these are, this is a map of Europe where most of them have gone. These are the numbers. The maximum in terms of proportion is also Germany, 1%, and Sweden is 1%, and Hungary. And then the percentages get very low. The United States, it's 5/10,000ths of a percent. There is a pretty good argument. There's been a great deal of resistance to this in the United States. This is Canada. This is France. And there's a pretty good argument. This has, in fact, destabilized Western democracy in a very serious way. So we have the very promising feature of democracies in Eastern Europe, such as Hungary and Poland, moving toward dictatorship under pressure from the immigration and these 1 million Syrian refugees. France maintained a progressive regime, but the person who ran second was Marine Le Pen, who was running on an anti-immigrant platform primarily. Many people attribute Brexit, which is regarded by many economists as a self-destructive economic decision, on the resistance to or concern about immigration. And of course, we have the United States, where many people attribute the election of Donald Trump to this same pressure from immigrants. Now, a number of climate scientists have attributed the Syrian crisis to climate change. In other words, the desiccation of the farmlands in Syria has led to conflicts between people who were previously getting along with each other. And whether or not this is actually occurring is sort of not the primary point. The primary point is that it will occur. That is to say that 1 million Syrian refugees has had, as far as we can tell, extremely deleterious effects on democracy in the Western world. And what's going to happen? Okay, so this is Bengal. These are divided into two political entities, Bangladesh and the Indian state of West Bengal. It has a population, as you see, of about 250 million people, close to the United States in an area the size of Minnesota. Most of it is very low-lying land. And it includes extremely crowded cities. So both capital cities have about 3 times as many people each as Houston, which we've heard about. And what will happen if sea level rise produces not 1 million refugees, but 100 million refugees? And those people, and this is just from one small area of the developing world, what will happen and how will we respond, and will democracy survive if there are tens of millions of refugees or more refugees reaching our shores or demanding entry? And how will we, how are we going to respond to that? It's not promising that a successful political campaign compared human beings to Skittles, but what seems to be one possibility is that our problems in management, our problems in not being able to confront climate change will undermine our success in solving the problem of succession through democracy. And the lugubrious history of the 20th century suggests, and I'll close with this, several mechanisms by which this might occur. One is the kinds of leaders that will be generated by a sense of crisis. And we all know the kinds of leaders like Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin who were generated by an intense sense of crisis during the 20th century. We now have a leader generated by a sense of crisis who I think many people regard as both playing on racial hatreds and having some serious problems in in ability to govern. But one of the proposals is to declare stateless, in effect, close to 1 million people who came to this country as children and have contributed to and have lived in this country now for their entire lives. That was the movement made to, and Hannah Arendt has written about this, by totalitarian regimes to begin the process of punishing and ultimately exterminating minorities, is to declare them stateless, to declare them no longer members of the community. The second phenomenon is the disengagement of the public from democratic processes because they didn't want to take responsibilities for the kinds of actions that were taken by these strong leaders. So the sense of no longer wanting to participate, but wanting to defer to a strong leader in order to get the things done that fear or panic or crisis is leading you to think needs to be done. And the third, and I'll close with this, is what I think what can be called the politics of anger. That is to say, the way that these two things interact, the leader interacts with the populace to generate a kind of politics based not on rational decision-making, but on vindictive, forceful responses. So in the three most horrible regimes of the 20th century, Nazi Germany, Stalinist Soviet Union, and then Mao's China, in each of the cases, the mass killings that made those regimes so horrific were begun not by the projection of government force, but simply by mobilizing the anger of the populace to act on its own, beginning with Hitler's mobilization of anti-Semitism in Kristallnacht, which preceded any government, the final solution. Stalin's murder of the kulaks, which was responsible for something between 4 and 10 million deaths, began with a newspaper editorial that he wrote. Mao's Cultural Revolution, responsible for 10 to 20 million deaths, began similarly with hortatory declarations, not with government action. And so, this response is a result of a shift of people's attitude from being critical participants in government to being mobilized followers of suggestions based on hatred, based on fear, coming from the leadership. So that interaction between a leader who doesn't believe in democratic processes anymore and a public that has disengaged from a sense of responsibility can lead to this kind of crisis situation. And so it seems to me that our success, the humanity of our country, our ability to choose our own leaders, our ability to solve the problem of succession in a peaceful way is at risk from the problems we have had in managing an oncoming crisis through the democratic process.